Hi everyone, I'm Leyla Salvade, founder of Standing Light. Welcome to the LightStyle interview series. Today I'm so excited to shine a light on Ruby Warrington, who is a journalist, an author, and the founder of the Numinous.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
I'm so happy to be here.
Likewise, we're happy to have you. So we just met a few days ago, and I'm so excited because I've been following the Numinous, and to have you here now and explain a little bit what the Numinous is and your journey, I would love to hear where you started first and foremost. I know you're from England.
I'm from London originally, and
Yeah.
I've been here in New York for 5 years. I moved here 2012, which we all know was like the year that changed everything for everyone.
Yes.
And launched so many people, actually, coincidentally, on our healing journeys and on our path into this light work that we're all doing,
sure.
right? So yeah, I had a long career working as a magazine journalist in London, winding up by that stage as features editor at the Sunday Times Style supplement, which is kind of like T magazine for the Americans.
I don't even know what T magazine is.
T magazine comes with the New York Times. It's like the New York Times Style magazine, and it comes out monthly.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a glossy supplement. But in the UK, the Style supplement is a weekly magazine. So it was a very kind of high profile, but very high pressure job. And I'd worked very, very hard to get to that position. It was kind of like the apex of my journalistic ambitions at the time.
Amazing.
And yet, I found myself deeply unfulfilled and just really questioning, after sort of 4 years in this position, what I was really doing with my life, what I was here to contribute, and also why I was not happy. I had achieved everything that I thought I wanted. On paper, everything's fabulous. And yet inside, I'm just kind of doing all this questioning and really wondering what it's all for. And then the universe intervened. My husband ended up getting a job in New York, and so I was kind of like, okay, well, I probably wouldn't have left my job for anything less glamorous than that, in a way, you know? It took that alluring an option for me to actually say, okay, yeah, well, I'm going to leave and do something else. But I had already had the idea for the Numinous, which is my online magazine. Well, it's an online magazine and event series, a conscious lifestyle platform, I suppose. And I cover all things esoteric and new age, but give it an upgrade for what I call the now age.
I love
So
it.
kind of astrology, tarot, alternative healing practices, shamanism, but through a very chic, sophisticated, and fun lifestyle lens.
Which is so perfect for you, you know, like the British, like, properness and, you know, mixed with the spiritual new age. It's so you, I feel like. It's so lovely.
Well, I really felt I'd always been fascinated by astrology, and that's really where the kind of like spark began for me. When I found myself doing this deep kind of existential inquiry as to like, what am I really here to do? This little voice in my head was like, study astrology. And I'm like, huh? That's a little bit random. But it's always been a passion of mine, and that's where it began. But what I realized, coming from this kind of fashion magazine, very slick, glossy background that I had my whole career in, there wasn't anything presenting or talking about astrology through that lens, something that I aesthetically could relate to, or even kind of like in terms of like the style of tone and things like that. Certainly I knew so many people who worked in the industry who were absolutely fascinated by astrology and all of these other kind of mystical lifestyle topics, but who were a little bit kind of like, ew, it's a bit woo-woo,
Exactly.
I have to keep in the closet about this because it's just not very cool. So I saw a real gap to create a platform that presented all of these topics in a way that made them more accessible, and presented them with a very beautiful aesthetic to make them more alluring to people, you know, to kind of like help override that uncool, slightly crunchy kind of woo-woo connotation, you know?
Yeah, and it is. It's so beautiful. Your website alone is it's so well presented, and I think that's so important because beauty does do something to us on a deeper level.
Absolutely.
And so if you can make something beautiful, it's already more palpable, no matter what it is, you know? So
Exactly. I actually think of beauty as almost like a physical manifestation of the energy of love. And
my
it's
gosh.
what attracts us to anything, be it a person, be it a magazine, be it an animal, be it a dish of food, you know? And so wanting to create, I really wanted to introduce people to these subjects as invaluable tools for self-exploration, for self-understanding, for personal development, and for as a way to sort of connect to the natural world too, particularly with something like astrology, you know. Connecting to the phases of the moon alone can give you an amazing monthly practice that really keeps you connected to the rhythms of the planet. Living in cities like New York and London, we're so divorced from that a lot of the time, and yet it's a really intrinsic part of being human. But if it all seems really kind of like, it's a really like ugly website, and it's just, and it feels like it hasn't had an update since like the 1970s, like no one's gonna, it's very easy to dismiss it.
Exactly.
And to overlook the real beauty and value of these practices, you know?
Yeah, it's so true. And the thing is these are practices that we've had for ages. I mean, harvest season was all based off of on the moon's cycle. So these are just things that are intrinsically ingrained within us.
Exactly.
And just to bring them out in a beautiful way to unite us with the celestial bodies is so powerful.
Totally. I have a friend who's a custom ritual designer. So she works with people one-to-one to design rituals, intentional practices for them around certain manifestations, or, you know, I mean, a wedding ceremony is an example of a ritual which we enact and don't even think of it as such almost. But she creates these rituals for people for all kinds of things, for a new job, or somebody who might want to find a relationship, etc. And she describes things like ritual, astrology, etc., or the tarot as ancient human technologies. They're the ways that we humans sought to understand the world before we built machines that kind of like did that for us.
Right.
And as such, helps us to understand the world in a much more tangible way.
I love that. That's incredible. So tell us about your journey. I would love to know how you went from you as a little girl and what inspired what you are doing now. How could you see little pinpoints in your life that led you to being here?
Well, I'm from London, born and bred. My mom was kind of quite alternative. She doesn't like me using the word hippie, but
there we
go. She was into macrobiotic food and like yoga and all of this stuff back in the 70s when I was born. And we actually moved out of London, and I grew up in the countryside, and I had a very kind of close relationship to nature as a kid, I guess, and I feel so grateful to her for actually taking us to the countryside to give us that early childhood experience.
That is one of the biggest gifts.
But at the same time, I definitely was a kind of outsider at school, you know? And as soon as I was old enough to know what Barbie was, my allegiances kind of switched from like the flower fairies at the end of my garden to like, oh, Barbie who has an amazing wardrobe and a boyfriend called Ken. I kind of want to be, I think Barbie's the way I'm going to go. So I then pursued a career in fashion. Like I really thought I wanted to be a designer, and sort of went to London College of Fashion, studied journalism there, and found my way into fashion magazines via styling. But actually discovered that the journalism component of my course was where I really felt on the flow, and I really felt I could express myself the most truly. So pursued the writing side of fashion magazine journalism, but always had been fascinated with astrology. My mum had my birth chart done when I was a small child, when I was born really. And I remember I must have been about age 3, where someone told me I'd been born in the year of the dragon.
Me too.
Oh my goodness! We're both Aries dragons.
Yeah, seriously.
Fierce. But I think something in the little girl Ruby was so excited by the idea that I was represented by the dragon, this kind of like mythical beast, and just really struck a chord in me, you know, this myth and this idea of like an energy that we couldn't necessarily see, but we were related to, and that kind of lived through us. So I'd always really been passionate about astrology, but kind of like pushed it into the closet a little bit because it wasn't seen as very cool. But yeah, when I decided that I was going to create this platform, moved to New York, but still was very kind of like, was still very addicted, I guess, to the kudos and the status and all of the gloss and glamour of the fashion world, and I wasn't going to let that go quickly. It took me at least a year or so to actually start working on the idea for the Numinous after I'd had that idea before moving to New York, because I was still trying to kind of like cling on to that world. And these days I kind of walk the line between the both. Like the tagline for the Numinous is Material Girl, Mystical World. And I actually have a book coming out in May that's also called Material Girl, Mystical World.
I love it.
And it's kind of my story from material girl back into rediscovering this mystical world, but the underlying message is almost like you don't have to choose between one or the other. We live in kind of a world now where we can have access to all of these amazing ancient human technologies and practices without having to go and meditate in a cave for 12 years, or without having to go, like so many people do, and how fantastic. And I would love to do this at some point in my life on any kind of an actual physical pilgrimage, you know, to study in India or to do all these things. I've kind of described my book slightly as a sort of anti-eat, pray, love, because rather than go to an ashram for a year, I actually came to New York and had my spiritual awakening.
Literally, yes.
I came to New York, which is like the epicenter of kind of consumer culture and the American dream, and had this spiritual awakening where I've really, I just place a very different value on material things now. I still love to have beautiful things in my life. I still adore fashion, but I consume it in a completely different way. I'm much more choosy, and I'm much more aware that these things are not going to bring me happy. They're just nice kind of icing on the top of everything else, you know?
Right, yeah, exactly. And we met actually at your event where you were...
Yes.
Tell us about that, because it's so cool.
I really wanted to... I think that I've become more and more disenchanted with the idea of fast fashion.
Exactly.
You know, it's the second dirtiest industry on the planet. And particularly while the whole Dakota Access Pipeline thing has been like all over everyone's social media feeds and people are feeling so passionate about this, I felt there was a real, not hypocrisy because it's not something people are particularly aware of, but if you're feeling passionately about an issue like an environmental issue like that and yet still going and shopping at, you know, a fast fashion brand, it's not really, there's a disalignment there. So I wanted to, so more and more I've been using New York's amazing consignment boutiques to do a lot of my shopping, and have got really back into the idea of like vintage fashion and secondhand fashion, the idea of sharing clothes, and because there's so many beautiful clothes in the world, you know? Seriously. And if we could all just share a bit more, we could all feel like we have something new all the time. Without there having to be this constant churn and constant turnover. And I know I have friends who are designers, there's more and more pressure to create not just 2 seasons a year, but more like 6 seasons now.
I know, it's
because
insane.
the stores and the nature of online shopping means that everybody needs new stuff all the time, because they need new stuff to Instagram, they need new stuff to lure people in. And it just creates more and more waste and is more and more damage to the environment. So I wanted to do an event that was still fun, but that would kind of like subtly draw attention to this. So it was, we called it a New Moon fashion swap. We encouraged people to come donate their hand-me-downs or their cast-offs, and then come back and kind of like shop the store in the afternoon. And all of the money went to the Indigenous Environmental Network, who've been one of the key kind of groups protesting the Dakota Access Pipeline.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's so incredible. What would you say was one of your darkest moments that fueled you towards your higher self?
About a year before I left the Sunday Times Style magazine, I was diagnosed with adrenal fatigue, which is extremely common living in these big cities. And it was manifesting as just extreme anxiety. I was in the office often to the point of tears, like overwhelmed by deadlines and my workload. I wasn't really sleeping through the night. And I just really, it's the only time I've ever sought out a professional therapist, although that didn't really feel like it was going to work for me. But I actually, by chance, did an interview with a nutritionist who kind of diagnosed this could be adrenal fatigue. I suggest you cut out coffee and sugar from your diet. And with so many people, diet can often be, I think, the first thing that can help you connect back to your source energy, your spirit. So I removed these 2 substances from my diet, and within 2 weeks, I'm sleeping through the night, I have my energy back. I have the sense that I'm in control of my life again back. It was that potent. And from there, I then had the energy, rather than feeling like I'm the victim of this situation, I'm overwhelmed, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing with my career, poor me. I was placed back in the position of, okay, this isn't working for me, what am I going to do about it? I had the energy to actually really think, what can I do about this? What are the steps I can take? The fog had almost lifted. So it's not like a dramatic kind of like rock bottom, but it kind of felt like it at the time because I was very depressed and very anxious. But yeah, and I think just taking those simple steps towards changing my diet you know, had then a profound domino effect and brought me here 5 years later. I run this kind of like Now Age lifestyle platform. I have a book coming out, you know. It's just, yeah, it's incredible where life can take you when you start actually stepping up, taking responsibility for making the changes that you know you need to. And also shifting, I think for me a big thing was shifting my focus away from how can my work get me what I need, to how can my work give the world something that it needs, you know? And that's a very...
mode into serving.
Totally. And that's a very subtle but profound shift in consciousness that I think many people are undergoing or going through at this particular moment in time.
Who would you attest your light to, or who would you call your light hero?
Oh my goodness, that's a really difficult question. I could say my inner child.
That is so powerful.
You know, I just think that we're all born with that unique light inside of us, and life circumstances and conditioning and parental kind of things that we inherit from our parents and can just kind of like dull it. And I think I'm a huge proponent of doing as many things as I can, or just really kind of like trying to reconnect back to that kind of innocence of that innocence and that sense of kind of inner potential as often as possible. But having said that, I mean, there have been so many people. I feel like moving to New York, and I was really dropped into the epicenter of a really kind of exciting Now Age lifestyle scene. And there are so many people here just really, you know, living their light and really committed to spreading that amongst others with their work. And I feel so incredibly privileged to have many of whom contribute to my site, many of whom are featured in my book. So yeah, so many people.
That's so beautiful. I love that you honor your inner child so powerfully. That's a huge healing component.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about your book.
So my book is Material Girl, Mystical World, and it's kind of a guide to many of the subjects that I cover on the Numinous. So it's how to use astrology, how to work with the tarot, what is shamanism, what is plant medicine, all of these different subjects, but kind of through the lens of my personal experiences. So became a bit more of a memoir than I ever really intended it to be. And it's kind of quite funny, and there's lots of anecdotes about the different celebrities that I've interviewed and all those sorts of things too. But I've been kind of describing it as a manifesto for spiritual activists disguised as a glamorous romp through the Now Age. The idea of spiritual activism is really about, yes, it's fantastic to learn about all these tools to be able to heal ourselves and come more into our wholeness. But what's the point of that? But really to then start living our lives and doing our work from that place as well, so that we're contributing something to the greater good.
Amazing. I can't wait to read it.
I'm so excited for it to be out there.
Yeah, May 2nd, right?
May 2nd is the pub date here in the States, yes. Okay. And you can pre-order it now. It's available on all of the major retailers.
So we'll put a link below.
That's fab.
So closing question, what does LightStyle mean to you?
LightStyle to me means not taking yourself or your life too seriously.
I love it.
I think that when we're talking about things like healing and service, it can come with this very kind of like serious tone. And of course, yeah, this is serious business. Like, this is living with integrity, and this is showing up and taking responsibility. But I think that we can bring humor to all of that, and that's what humanizes it, you know? I think John Lennon said something about that when he and Yoko Ono were staging their famous bed-in protests against the Vietnam War. He talked about how our secret weapon is humor, you know? And the more we can kind of lean into that and make it feel pleasurable and fun, the more it feels like, why wouldn't we live this way? Why wouldn't we choose to show up and take responsibility, you know? Rather than it being some kind of like duty that we should be doing, you know?
Life is made to have fun, and the more serious we take it, the more heavier it feels.
Exactly.
And what's the point of that? We're here to just embrace the light that we are and share it. So thank you so much. Yeah.
I was just going to say, there is a time, of course, for reverence and depth and solemnity, but at the same time, I think that humor is what makes us spring out of bed every day.
Totally. Yeah, we need both.
Yeah.
This is, you can't demonize the dark or beautify the light, because you need both. I mean, as much as I understand that we use dualities to describe things in this dimension, really at the end of the day, it's all one. It's the theory of everything.
Yes,
exactly. There would be no day without night. There is no good without bad. It just is. So it's interesting to look at it in both ways and embrace all of it.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Ruby, so much for being here. It was such a pleasure shining a light on you, and I'm so excited to read your book and yeah, help inspire more people to just follow their path just as you did.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. If you like this episode of the LightStyle interview series, please share with your friends and family, and don't forget to hit subscribe.